All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive. Today we're going to be delving into the life of a single individual from the 19th century, Isaac Seaver. He lived in Massachusetts from 1823 to 1901. And we're going to try to get a real feel for what life was like back then by looking at all the records that we have about Isaac: census data, vital records, land deeds, military documents, probate information. It's really a full picture.
It really is a treasure trove when you find a collection like this, and it gives us so much to think about.
Yeah.
Really puts us in the shoes of an ordinary person, and that's what makes it so interesting. I mean, his story starts in Westminster, Massachusetts, and takes us through different towns, different jobs, marriages, even the Civil War. I mean, it's quite a journey.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating. Like, we could read a textbook about the 19th century, but when we get into the nitty-gritty of one person's life, their struggles, their triumphs, it really makes history come alive. We see how these major events and societal shifts actually impacted individual people, how they made their decisions, how they lived their lives. So, are you ready to dig in?
Absolutely. I'm always ready to dive into a good set of records.
Okay, perfect. So let's start with the basics. Who was Isaac Seaver?
Well, Isaac Seaver was born on October 16th, 1823, in Westminster, Massachusetts. His parents were Benjamin Seaver and Abigail Gates. Now, right from the beginning, there's this interesting tidbit. He was actually known as Isaac Seaver III.
The third. Wow. Okay, so like a junior situation.
Not quite. You see, there were two other Isaac Seavers living in Westminster at the time. One was his uncle, and get this, the other was his stepfather, because his mother, Abigail, she remarried after Benjamin died, and, you guessed it, she married another Isaac Seaver.
Oh, wow. So three Isaac Seavers all in the same town. I can only imagine the male mix-ups.
Exactly. Must have been quite confusing.
Okay, so little Isaac, or rather Isaac III, grows up in this, kind of blended family situation. But then, sadly, in 1838, when he's just 14 years old, he has to choose a legal guardian.
Yeah, that really struck me when I saw that in the records. At 14, to have to make that kind of decision, it really speaks to the times, I think.
Absolutely. And he chose his maternal uncle, Jeremiah Knowlton Gates. So what do you think? I mean, what could that tell us about their family dynamics?
Well, it might suggest that he felt closer to his mother's side of the family, especially after losing his father at such a young age. And, formal guardianships were pretty common back then. It was a way to legally protect the well-being and the property of minors who didn't have parents.
Right, right. So fast forward a few years, Isaac gets married for the first time.
Yes, in 1846, he marries a woman named Juliet Glazier in Rutland, Massachusetts.
And they have a daughter, right?
They do. A daughter named Juliet, born in 1847. But tragically, Juliet, the mother, passes away shortly after the birth. The cause of death listed is brain fever.
Brain fever. That sounds pretty scary.
It was a pretty broad term back then, used to describe all sorts of conditions involving inflammation of the brain. Could have been meningitis, encephalitis, even a really bad infection.
So basically, they didn't have the medical knowledge or treatments that we have today.
Exactly. It was a very different time.
So Isaac is now a widower, a single father at a young age. That must have been incredibly difficult.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it? But life goes on, and in 1851 he remarries, this time to a woman named Lucretia Townsend Smith in Walpole, Massachusetts. And they end up having a pretty big family.
Yeah, 4 children, right?
That's right, 4 children: Frank, Benjamin, Elizabeth, and Ellen, who they called Nellie. And it's this expansion of his family that really brings to light the cyclical nature of life back then. How people rebuilt their lives after loss and hardship.
Makes you think, for sure. And then later in life, after Lucretia passes away in 1884, Isaac gets married for a third time.
He does, at the age of 64. Marries Elvina Matilda Bradley, who was a widow herself. Their marriage took place in 1888 in St. Regis Falls, New York. It really shows you that companionship and family were important to him throughout his life.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about how Isaac made a living, because, his occupations over the years really paint a picture of the economic landscape of 19th century Massachusetts.
Absolutely. So in the 1850 census, we find him in Medfield, and he's listed as a hay fork maker. So, connected to agriculture, making tools for farming, pretty typical for the rural economy at the time.
Right, makes sense. But then, just a few years later, he's listed as a machinist. Still in Medfield, but a different kind of work.
Yeah, that shift is really interesting. It suggests that the area was starting to industrialize, factories popping up, more mechanized production, and that would have created a demand for machinists, people who could operate and repair these new machines. So for Isaac, it might have been a chance for better pay, more stability than traditional craft work.
It's like he was adapting to the changing times.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then by 1860, he's back in his hometown of Westminster, and he's listed as a blacksmith.
Hmm.
And importantly, he owns property now, both real estate and personal property. So he's clearly doing well for himself.
Yeah, building a life, establishing himself. But then we see another shift, right?
We do. By the 1870s and 1880s, he's living in Leominster, and he's still a blacksmith, but now he's working in a fork shop. So he's specializing, focusing on making forks, probably for farming or other uses, and he's not listed as self-employed anymore, so it seems like he's working for a larger workshop.
So again, adapting to the changing economy.
Exactly. He wasn't stuck in one path. He evolved with the times.
And speaking of evolving with the times, let's talk about his land transactions, because those are interesting too.
Yeah, they give us some clues about his financial activities and how he was connected to these different communities.
Right. So in 1847, right after his first marriage, he buys 50 acres of land in Gardner, Massachusetts. So maybe thinking about farming, maybe building a home.
Could be. Then, in 1858, he buys land in Westminster, specifically on the road to Ashburnham, so strengthening his ties to his hometown. But then, there's this curious thing that happens in 1861. He sells 3 lots in Westminster, and then buys them back a short time later.
Why do you think he did that?
It's hard to say for sure without more information. Maybe a short-term financial need, maybe some kind of property line adjustment. It's a bit of a mystery, but it definitely shows that he was actively managing his assets.
And then, of course, we can't talk about this period without talking about the Civil War, a major event that impacted so many lives, and Isaac Seaver was no exception.
Right. So in 1863, at 39 years old, he registers for the Civil War draft in Westminster. His occupation is listed as mechanic at this point. And then, August of 1864, he enlists as a private in the 4th Regiment of Massachusetts Heavy Artillery.
So he enlists kind of late in the war. Why do you think that was?
That's a good question. It could have been a sense of duty, patriotism, of course. But for a man his age, with a family, there might have been other factors too. Maybe financial reasons, enlistment bonuses were a thing, and the promise of a pension later on could have been appealing. We can only speculate, but it's definitely something to think about.
And we actually have a physical description of him from his enlistment papers.
We do. They describe him as having blue eyes, a light complexion, sandy hair. He was 5 foot 10.5 inches tall, not a small guy.
A blacksmith, after all. So he serves until his term expires in 1865. He musters out in Washington, D.C. And even though he didn't see combat for a very long time, it still would have been a difficult experience.
Absolutely. Being a soldier is never easy, even in peacetime. And, later on in 1892, he applies for an invalid pension based on his service. And the list of ailments he cites is pretty long. Varicose veins, rheumatism, heart trouble, urinary problems, and even the lingering effects of a carbuncle on his neck.
Wow, that's a lot to deal with.
It really makes you think about the physical toll that his work as a blacksmith, combined with his time in the Army, must have taken on his body. And, he was awarded a pension, $8 per month. Might not seem like much today, but back then it would have been helpful.
Yeah, I bet. So, sadly, Isaac passes away in 1901 in Leominster. Cause of death was stomach cancer.
And he's buried in Evergreen Cemetery, next to his second wife, Lucretia. But there's something really touching about his gravestone. It also mentions his first wife, Juliet, and 2 of his children, Benjamin and Nellie, even though Nellie actually lived for many years after him.
That's really sweet. Like, he wanted them to be remembered together.
Exactly. It speaks to the importance of family, even across different chapters of his life. And then, of course, we have his will. He names Hamilton Mayo as his executor, and there's some interesting details in there about how he wanted his estate to be handled.
Yeah, so he leaves a pretty substantial sum of money, $1,200, and all his furniture to his third wife, Alvina. But it specifically says that this is in place of her dower rights or any other claims to his property. What do you make of that?
It seems like he wanted to make sure Alvina was taken care of, but also that the rest of his estate went to his children from his second marriage. Kind of like a clear separation of assets. Blending families and estate planning, it can get complicated.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting that he leaves a very small amount, just $1, to the children of his deceased son, Benjamin.
Right. And the rest of his estate was to be divided equally among his living children, Juliet, Frank, Elizabeth, and Nellie. It's all laid out very clearly in the will.
And his estate was worth a decent amount at the time, almost $3,800. So he had built a good life for himself, financially speaking.
He had. And, it's not just the big facts and figures that paint a picture of him. There were these little anecdotes that have been passed down through the family. Like, apparently, his third wife, Alvina, was very particular about cleanliness, and she always insisted that he take off his shoes before coming into the house.
Oh, wow. That's a great little detail. It really makes them feel like real people.
It does, and that's what I love about these deep dives.
Yeah.
It's not just about dates and names, it's about getting a glimpse into the everyday lives of people from the past.
Absolutely. So, having gone through all of this, what stands out to you the most about Isaac Seaver's life? What does it tell us about the 19th century?
I think what strikes me most is his adaptability. He was willing to learn new skills, move to different towns, change careers as the economy shifted around him. He faced personal tragedy, he served his country, and he ultimately built a good life for himself and his family. I mean, that's resilience.
And it makes you realize that there were so many people like him living their lives, facing challenges, making choices, contributing to the fabric of society. We just don't always have the records to piece together their stories in such detail.
Exactly, and that's what makes Isaac's story so valuable. It's a window into a world that we can only imagine, a world that was both very different from our own and yet, in many ways, still connected to us.
Well said. And I hope that our listeners, after listening to this deep dive, will be inspired to learn more about their own family histories, to explore the lives of those who came before them. Because really, that's how we connect to the past and understand our place in the grand scheme of things.
I couldn't agree more. It's all about those connections, those threads that weave through time and bind us together.
Well, on that note, thank you for joining us for another fascinating deep dive. We'll be back soon with another intriguing look into the past. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those connections alive.
And always remember, history is more than just dates and names. It's about the stories of real people.